Hello and welcome to Handgun Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Machad from the wild woods of central Maine, and this is your home for all the news, information, and discussion in the handgunning world. This week is episode 47 of Handgun Radio, and we have a very special guest, Randy Lee from Apex Tactical Specialties, here with us to discuss what Apex does and how they can take your competition or defensive handgun to the next level. So, as always, Handgun Radio is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network, and Brownells helps make handgun radio possible. Selection, service, and satisfaction. Find it all at Brownells. If you're doing any shopping with Brownells, please use our affiliate link, handgunradio.com/Brownells, to help support the show. So, Randy, it's a great pleasure to have you on. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, Ryan, and thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, it's really glad to have you on. Matt Hoffman's been highly recommending you come on. We've been sort of doing a master's series discussing all the different, gunsmithing and different parts and stuff like that. So it's a really great addition to the whole master's series on this.
Well, thank you. Hopefully I can contribute something to it, to the conversation.
All right, so we're going to move into the week in review, and this will just be a little short discussion about what happened this past week. So I got the chance to head out to the range today and shoot many different guns. We did a video on 6 rifles and 5 handguns, and there's a link to a video overview of the guns you'll see posted on the Ryan Machad Handgun Radio YouTube page in the coming months. So be sure to go check that link out. It's going to be right in the show notes. And basically just been working on stuff for the Firearms Radio Network. Jake has now started his sabbatical, so if you have any questions, be sure to email me, ryan@handgunradio.com. So, Randy, what did you do this week in firearms?
This week for firearms, was the chaotic attempting to bring new products to life and get some beta testing done on various products that we're starting to develop, and then also conceptualizing some new ones.
Yeah, it can always be hectic. I mean, you get the things you want to do, and the list keeps bigger and gets bigger and gets bigger, and then everything else gets in the way. I know how that goes.
Absolutely. Life sort of gets in the way of my shooting and my practice, so I've got to try to find that balance that I know exists somewhere. I just haven't found it yet.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad you're working towards putting those new products out, and I'm sure they'll be well accepted by the shooting community.
Well,
So
thank you.
we're going to wrap up the week in review and head into the main topic. So we're going to speak with Randy Lee of Apex Tactical Specialties. So, Randy, you're the president, CEO, along with a partner of Apex Tactical Specialties. And so, what exactly does Apex do for our listeners who aren't familiar with the company?
Well, currently what Apex does is we design drop-in components for the Smith & Wesson series pistols, the Glocks in various forms, as well as the Smith & Wesson revolvers. So we started out doing generally pistol smith, but we evolved into manufacturing. That tended to sort of give us a little bit more creativity and provide a little bit more to our customer base so that they didn't have to send their firearms in for us to work on. Hopefully they could do everything as much as we could possibly to have them do basically in their own kitchen.
Now, did the company start out with more of a focus on competition guns or more of a focus on defensive use, or maybe a mix of both?
It was really a mix of both. When Apex first started, we were doing custom gunsmithing, partially for competition, but a big part of ours was armor work for the law enforcement locally, and essentially that's how Apex really started and gained its its reputation and name, was within the law enforcement communities here locally.
Yeah, it seems like when I hear of custom drop-in parts for guns, particularly the M&P series of guns, Apex is the first name I hear. There are other companies that make specific parts for other guns, but when it comes to the M&P series guns, the name I most often hear is Apex.
Yeah, I think we were fortunate enough to be one of the first into the market. The Smith & Wesson M&P came out, I think, right around 2006, and there wasn't a whole lot of aftermarket support for the firearm other than holsters, really. We just happened to come in with a few parts that because of the nature of the M&P and its, I guess its elegant simplicity is a good way to put it, of being able to tear down and put in a few components. That's how we came up with the ideas for improving the fire control system and being able to make it a drop-in, which would make it significantly more appealing to the average user.
Definitely. I mean, allowing them to do stuff themselves rather than having to send it off and not have the gun for several weeks or with some shops several months.
Absolutely.
Now, in terms of your background, what got you into the world that is now Apex Tactical Specialties?
Um, wow, that's a that's a good question. I have to say that what got me really into it probably was the advent of the, I don't know, the handgun culture in the magazines. When media came out, like American Handgunner, that's sort of what propelled me into the interest, because now I'd always loved firearms and handguns in particular, but now I got to see photos of some of the new and upcoming firearms, and then what also custom pistol smiths could do to them. So that's pretty much what started the process and started for me.
No, in terms of educational background, I remember reading on the site that you have a bachelor's in engineering. Did that sort of was that something you chose to do before firearms, or was that something you did with your interest in firearms?
It started as trying to find a career path. And actually, my degree is in electronic engineering, which is just a little bit different than the mechanical. But going to the Cal Poly, or where I got my degree, they focus on cross training between engineering disciplines. So I got a good experience in dealing with the mechanical, the material engineering, and so forth. And so that gave me the background to start to understand from an engineer standpoint how to look at a system, how to find out where those areas are that can either introduce an advantage or a disadvantage in problems, and come up with different solutions to an entire system rather than just looking at one part and just trying to make a part. It sort of evolves into how can you make it an entire, let's say for the actions, um, how can you eliminate a lot of the drag points and make it so that you have a very smooth and consistent or repeatable trigger pull. And that's what Cal Poly did for me. It allowed me that sort of mindset, how to improve things overall.
Well, in understanding, I remember speaking with a few pistol smiths before, and understanding the relationship between the various parts and how altering one can alter the other really makes the difference between a quality action work and not quality action work. I mean, some people not understanding that maybe removing the hammer spur will remove too much hammer mass and cause light primer strikes or something like that is an example of not knowing, the relationship between what you're actually going to do and how it's going to affect the part, not only in the way you want to, but maybe in an unintended way.
Yeah, exactly. There's you start to look at things like energy and momentum, and how energy and momentum are conserved, and how, if you, like you said, you affect one part, how does that affect the rest of the system, and the cascading events that can occur between systems, from the hammer and sear engagement to where the firing pin is, how much mass it has, and how much resistance there might be in a recoil or a mainspring, or firing pin spring, and all those can have subtle effects.
So, kind of moving away from the how you got started with Apex Tactical, how did you get started personally shooting? Like, what was your first exposure to guns? Maybe what were your first guns?
First gun beyond the dart gun back when I was a kid was it was a Stevens bolt action single shot 22, and I had begged my parents to be able to shoot the NRA junior competition, and so that's what they got me. The trigger was horrendous, but it the NRA program taught me a little bit more about focusing on the sight picture, breathing, all the fundamentals that would apply across the boards, and specifically even to handguns.
Now, how did you get started sort of into handguns? Because I mean, that really is the specialty of Apex. You guys don't work on rifles or anything, right?
Not currently,
Okay.
but what got me into handguns was just a general interest. And when I became 21, I purchased my first revolver. It was a Smith & Wesson Model 28. Uh, a very classic. It was one of the trade-ins when the law enforcement agencies were going to Glocks and semi-autos, and I basically sort of tore into it and just kind of see how things worked. And then I got a Model 586 shortly thereafter when they were released because I loved the Python, but I was on a student's budget, so the Python seemed like an astronomical and unobtainable firearm for me. And so that sort of morphed into love of semi-autos, trying those, and the next gun I got was an Auto Ordnance 45 because I had this master plan that I would build my own custom pistol after seeing American Handgunner and seeing Bill Wilson's work and Ed Brown's work. But it didn't go quite as planned.
Yeah, I've refrained from modifying my Smith and Wessons. I've had the urges sometimes, but I'm like, they're too pretty. I'm not going to touch them because I know I'll mess something up.
But
So, go ahead.
but it's funny because that particular gun, I knew it wasn't a Colt, so I didn't feel so bad. It was a budget 1911, so I could learn to understand the system. And I literally obliterated that gun in my quest to understand how to make things work.
Now, does Apex do any work with the 1911 platform, or is it strictly the M&P autos?
We do, in fact, we've been branching out. We started primarily with the M&P is where we gained most of our fame, and prior to that was Smith and Wesson revolvers. But I've worked on 1911s. I've done several customs, Browning high powers. We do work on some level on SIGs, H and Ks. However, we leave that to a very good friend of mine, Bruce Gray, who owns Gray Guns, because that's sort of his forte. And then we're branching into the CZ because I see that as an upcoming platform, both
I've def-
for competition.
I've definitely seen that really taking hold in competition more and more every day with the CZ platform guns.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exciting for us.
Definitely. Apex is known for its, superb competition upgrades to Smith and Wesson revolvers and now the M&P autos, and Matt's always talking about it. So, does Apex offer specific tuning packages based upon the customer's needs? I.e., I want a defensive tune for this J frame, but I want a competition tune for this, N frame 45. Different varying on their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of different packages, and like you said, one is for we try to tailor it for defense applications if that's what the customer requests. And then for the competition realm, we go to the other extreme end where we, we do all the lightening and smoothing on the actions. We chamfer, we put in titanium cylinders where they're available, and try to improve the overall performance or stretch the performance envelope of those particular guns for competition. With the M&Ps, we have a duty carry kit, which most people can install themselves, but when the customer wants to send it to us to be able to work on, we we're sort of just like any custom pistol smith or gunsmith out there. They'll refine the system and tune it because there are tolerance differences from gun to gun.
Now, in terms of the smaller guns, we've spoken on the show about what makes a defensive revolver and auto difficult to shoot, but what makes them difficult to actually, how do I say this, make more shootable? Like, what's the most difficult part for you when you're tuning something like a J frame for a defensive tune?
Mm-hmm. Well, typically you have the typical issue that we'll find out is that you have some set amount of hammer force that's required to ignite particular ammo. So, like for guns that we've done for various law enforcement officers as their backup guns, sometimes the agencies request that it can't have below a particular threshold on pull. With the J frame and the smaller guns, you're also limited by the fact that you have smaller mechanical advantage because the closer the pivot point of the trigger and the hammer are together, it it reduces the amount of actual leverage that those parts can well, the trigger basically, it will increase the trigger pull weight because you don't have those better leverage points that you would say like an end frame gun. The As far as gearing it towards competition, it's really a matter of finding out, like at the very extreme, what the customer is going to use as far as ammunition, because that can have a big that can play a big part as far as reliability goes in a match. So there are some people that do compete with their backup guns in IDPA, and so if they're hand loading and they're using federal primers, then you can get a ridiculously light trigger pull even with a J frame, and it'll also be smooth as well, but it may not reliably ignite other factory ammo.
Like CCI.
Yes, exactly.
I've seen that problem with people, especially when, like, I had a buddy who had a lightened up Smith, and if he used CCI primers, he experienced a lot of misfires. But that's why, and that's cool though. And it really is true, the difference between the mechanical advantages, like you said, with the different sizes of frames, because I can take my J frame, my Model 60, and it's just a ridiculously heavy trigger pull, but then I take my Model 19, and it's altogether just a different ball game.
Yeah. You're familiar with ICOR, the
Yeah.
International Federation of Revolver Enthusiasts, which most of both my current partner Scott Folk and I are competitors. Several years ago, I wanted to find out just how light we could actually go for a competition gun, and so I kept tweaking on the systems. And currently, the trigger pull weight, if you're using federal primed hand loads, the threshold I have is about 3 pounds 2 ounces on the double action, and that's the gun that I'll be shooting in the match at the International Revolver Championship this upcoming weekend. So it's insane how light you can get if you know the leverage points and the mechanics of the system. And that seems to be about as light as I've been able to attain, at least so far, with what we have.
And maintain the reliability.
Yeah, and that's where I guess the rubber meets the road, because if I'm shooting and I have light strikes, then that pretty much puts my credibility at risk. So I want to know that what's the threshold, and if I can go 10% above that and still have ignition, like uniform positive ignition for the entire match,
right?
Then I would say that that is the threshold where I'd feel comfortable.
Now, I mean, how much in terms of putting in a drop-in part, and that really, would you say that the drop-in part business is where Apex has made it's made its name?
Absolutely, absolutely. If I've had discussions with other pistol smiths and even friends that are machinists, and the way we figured it and we calculated it out is if you have a drop-in kit that will do about 85% of what a custom pistol smith or gunsmith can do as far as lightening and smoothing, then the majority of people that are out there that don't shoot competitively, who don't have that kind of sensitivity within their trigger finger or haven't been exposed to a refined, I guess, trigger management systems, it becomes more positive for them, because it's significantly 85% is a pretty huge margin of increase or improvement over, say, a stock trigger pull. And that's where we've gained most of our popularity with that, because, as you said, you don't have to send the gun in and have the long waits and the delays and the shipping costs.
It kind of reminds me of a discussion I had with Grant Cunningham. He was talking about how with a lot of the stuff you can, like you said, 85%, a lot of the stuff that people want, and 90% of people out there would be satisfied with what a drop-in kit could do. And when you have people who do their own smithing, the kitchen table gunsmiths, a lot of the times where they run into that problem is when they're trying to get that last 15%.
Yes.
Which is, you have to be very careful, because there's not a large margin of error when it comes to getting that 15%.
Absolutely, because then if the person isn't really familiar with the systems and the tolerances, you can render the gun unsafe.
Right.
And that's where the custom pistol smiths really come into play. Trying to think of some of the big names in the M&P custom pistol smithing realm.
Well, and that's the thing. The M&P custom pistol smithing realm, there really isn't that many. I mean, you guys, honestly, I mean, in terms of what I hear about whenever I hear custom M&P stuff, it's Apex.
We've sort of, I guess we've sort of overshadowed, but there were people that are still and have been doing really outstanding work. Dan Burwell is one, and I think Dave Bowie is another one that have done a lot of work in massaging the guns before Apex really came on the market. We were fortunate enough that we were able to manufacture a part, which is primarily it's the sear, that was able to give us the mechanical advantage and the particular over travel distances and reset distances that we like to see in a gun. But they also, just like any custom pistol smith, they refine everything else. They go through the system and polish the parts that need polishing. They remove the machine marks where they're causing additional gravelly texture in the trigger pull, and they do a whole bunch of other stuff too.
Now, is there anything particularly different with the M&P pistols that maybe make them more difficult to either fashion apart or do pistol smithing on rather than as opposed to other polymer pistols?
Yeah, I tend to want to say that there are some things within the system that make it very easy to work on, but because of the restrictions on some of the parts that you can get that are available, if you're experimenting with the guns and like the factory components, there can be issues with the way the particular parts were manufactured. If they're the injection molded components, you may run into differences in hardnesses that can accelerate wear. Um, there's several other things that have to do with the tolerances within the guns, because Smith & Wesson has been turning out these guns by the metric ton because they've been so popular. So the only way that I've been able to foresee them able to put that many products out the door is they've had to loosen up on tolerances. And with a striker-fired pistol, the one that's most critical and of concern for us is the slide to frame tolerances. How high is the slide and the slide rails relative to the frame rails? Because the striker is in the frame, and that can lead to potentially dangerous situations where there's not enough engagement between the sear and the striker. And so you can have things like a ridiculously light trigger pull when it shouldn't be, or even slam firing where the striker gets cocked when the slide goes into battery, but there's not enough material to hold on to the striker and it goes forwards. So those are all things and factors, and that stuff, as far as us as manufacturers have to look at, where do our parts lie within that tolerance?
Definitely, you don't want someone with an accidentally full auto M&P. That would be unfortunate.
Yes.
So, in terms of the drop-in parts that you guys manufacture, in your opinion and your experience, what makes a good replacement or drop-in part?
I think for us, as far as my definition is, that a good drop-in part is one that for 98% of the guns does exactly what the manufacturer says it'll do. So, for instance, in ours, when I first designed the sear, I had designed it so that if that's all you dropped into the gun, it would give you a 4-pound pull. And by and large, when we first released it, that is what we got. In fact, the first sear that was the pre-production run, I dropped into a gun as soon as it was made, and it pulled at 4 pounds, 0.2 ounces. So that wasn't so much by design as luck, probably, but it did what we said it would do. It would shorten up the over travel and the reset distance. It would give you more pre-travel, but for that would only really be critical or of note for the first shot, because everything after that, if the person is riding from the reset, from the break to the reset, that's a substantially shorter distance, which means your shot-to-shot time is faster.
Well, it's always nice when something works right the first time, too, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a nightmare going back to the drawing boards.
Now, in terms of what can cause problems with a drop-in part, is that mainly focused upon like tolerances and stuff?
Typically, that's what we found. The tolerances for the manufacturer, because they have to compensate for wear, and for the most part, because the guns will typically operate within their envelope over an extreme tolerance difference, when you start to refine the trigger pulls in particular, that's where you start to get the concern of where their tolerance is not acceptable for your individual part. Like in this case, like our sear, in which case, if we had those issues where the tolerance between slide and frame got so large that our sears couldn't possibly hold on to the strikers reliably, then we would have to go back for a redesign.
Now, as someone who makes parts primarily, well, both for competition and defense, We've spoken here about what makes the guns difficult to gunsmith and stuff, but in your opinion, what makes revolvers and autos difficult to shoot in competition?
I think in terms of competition, what we've seen is typically it's trigger management or trigger pull. So for some people that may have rheumatoid arthritis or neuropathy or something like that, they can't physically pull like a double action revolver at 8 or 9 pounds. They may be able to pull it at say 6 pounds or 4 pounds. So what makes it hard becomes how the person interfaces with the trigger. And it's on the competition end, it can be sort of a flip side where the big thing for 1911s in USPSA are I want to run a light trigger pull. I want to run a 24 or a 16-ounce trigger pull. For people that have really good follow through and can slap the trigger, which Rob Leatham, Todd Jarrett, and several of them are very good at, they have extremely good follow through. It becomes somewhat problematic for the other shooters because if you look at a person that's used to a 3 pound pull and is trying to get used to a 2 pound or a 1 pound pull with a really short reset, depending on how you grip the gun, you could inadvertently touch off bump fire a few rounds because the gun will reset and push into the hand, which basically pulls your finger off the trigger face. When the slide goes forwards, it pulls the gun back into your trigger finger.
Right.
So that becomes some of the issue. But really it's primarily, my belief is that everybody can hit exactly what they aim at. It's just how we engage the trigger. And that requires some practice and discipline. But the lighter triggers, within reason, can definitely help with that.
Well, and like you're saying, with in terms of people shooting with the lighter triggers on like the 1911s, especially, that becomes sort of a discussion of hardware versus software. Is that person trying to compensate for a lack of motivation to
Yeah.
train with lighter trigger pulls and stuff like that? Maybe they would see a more appreciable benefit if they just practiced more and left the trigger as is.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. There's people look for the technological solution to the problems when, like you said, a lot of times it is the software. And that's typically some of the some of the some of our industry, is catering towards that and does cater towards it, and we do to some degree with the lighter competition triggers. The hope is that the person will practice with it and refine their trigger techniques, and like you said, practice and practice and practice, and just get better with what they have.
It's like with my J frame. I heard a lot of people talk about that sort of hump you feel as you doing the double action trigger pull on the J frames, where it stacks and lightens up and then it kind of holds. And rather than try to work that out myself, I actually practiced with it enough to the point where I use that to my advantage. I can kind of stage it and get a quote unquote single action trigger pull while doing double action.
Yeah.
Um, so it's stuff like that. I mean, you do have to train. You can't fix everything with a drop-in part.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's different. I think Jerry Mitchell gave me the best line. He said that, isn't it a shame that we spend all this money to get a 2 pound trigger pull, but we mash on the trigger with 27 pounds? And that is
Exactly.
very true. It comes back to how the person manages their trigger and how they interface. That's the primary interface for the gun, as far as in my experience.
So we got just a couple questions left here. So this is sort of like a more of a fantasy if you could question. So if you could see one change made to modern production handguns, both revolvers and automatics respectively, what would you do? What would you choose?
I think if there was one change, it would be pretty much in the execution of the gun. And by that I mean, if manufacturers looked at gearing the gun towards the competitive realm, if they did that, I think you would see some serious improvements overall in customer satisfaction for various reasons. The the standard firearm, it seems like we've gotten into, as far as firearms manufacturers have gotten into the mindset of the average person that buys their firearm will probably put no more than 400 rounds through the lifetime of the gun for them. It's just they fire a few rounds, they put it in the safe, and that's it. But case in point, when you start looking at the Smith & Wesson revolvers that we shoot in competition, the guns were never designed to have the gun shot in double action as fast as we do, opening and closing the cylinder as hard as we can in competition because we're more worried about speed of getting the gun loaded and cylinder shut. So things start to fall apart. For the revolvers, the cylinder stop slots start to open up. The entryway for the center pin in the frames opens up because there's so much force being applied to it. And so if they looked at it, well, we could reinforce these for a fairly small amount and improve their overall service life and longevity of the firearm. It wouldn't cost that much, but for those people that are shooting in competition, it would extend the service life. And thereby, because law enforcement and military are often not the most gentle on their firearms, it would tend to be more robustly designed and improve the service life before times where parts need to be changed.
What are your thoughts on the new 929 that Smith has put out? I mean, that sort of looks like something they're kind of specifically geared for the competition market.
Yeah, it's something that I know that Mr. Mitchell has been talking to them about for years, and they finally started to they finally listened to him. And the things I liked about it was that it did have a titanium cylinder, because I was one of the first people to use the titanium cylinders in competition just to see what the effects would be. The lighter rotating mass prolongs the service life of some of the internal parts, like the cylinder stops. And the harder surface on the titanium also reduces the amount of peening that happens. So there's less chance of the cylinder skipping as you start to use the gun more and more. The thing that they did also was they listened to Jerry about having a 6-inch barrel or 6.5-inch, which gave you a longer sight radius. And 9mm is a round that's relatively available to most people. And they also tailored the twist rate instead of their conventional, which is a 1 and 18 and 3/4 twist rate, which was designed for 357s way back when. They made it a little more modern for the 9mm cartridge. And so I'm hoping, I haven't seen one yet, but I'm hoping that the accuracy will be where it should be.
Well, and the thing I like about the 929 too with the 9mm is, 9 compared to a 38 in a moon clip is a really short and stubby cartridge. And I've seen videos with Jerry, and he just basically just throws it towards the cylinder, and it just magically finds its way in.
Yeah. A lot of the competitors will, in I-Core, because it has such a low power factor, will use 38 short Colts or 38 long Colts, or even trim down 38 special brass to make it shorter so that it ejects faster and loads faster. So yeah, the 9mm is a nice idea. It's a nice concept to see happen.
Definitely. So, sort of moving on to our last question. If you could design the Randy Lee Special, Revolver, and Auto, what would they look like, and what would the caliber be?
Oh, okay. I think for the revolver, I think the 9mm is a good choice. The the things I would do are definitely the titanium cylinder. It's kind of the same stuff that Smith & Wesson did with the 929, with the exception of I would reinforce some of the internal frame sections for hard use for competition, like the center pin hole in the frame. I would go with the bar stock or billet machined internals for the cylinder stop for the hammer and sear, because modern technology, they're using injection molded components now because it's cheaper. It's cheaper, and there's less machining. Well, there's no machining, virtually no machining they have to do. So it's almost like you can just get these parts and throw them in the gun, and they should work. Whereas the harder components will last longer. The the revolver also, I would do something slightly different. Is that I would bore the charge holes in the cylinder relative to the threaded portion on the frame. That way, every time the cylinder locks up, it's bored consistently midline with the axis of the barrel. And that's something that has been done in custom guns ages ago, but it hasn't really been done on a manufacturing like scale.
Right.
Now for the semi-autos, that's a tough one. There's, without going into too much detail, Apex will probably be releasing our own service pistol in the next 3 to 5 years. So there will be some things, but The current trend is striker-fired guns. I'd like to see one that is actually modular to where the person, if they like the DASA setup, the back end of the components, the fire control components could be swapped out with pretty much a simple replaceable trigger pack and hammer pack, and then put in a striker-fired system as well. So that the person in the department or whoever wanted to use it would have their choice. Because I'm a big fan of the DASA. I love the SIGs and the HKs and the CZs, but some people don't. The technology now, I think if I was going to make one, the frame materials I would probably select would be a carbon nanotube. Basically, that technology has made the material so much more robust, and for the amount of material that you would have to use, you could make a fairly thin frame, but it would be extremely rigid and not subject to corrosion or really temperature extremes, just like the current fiberglass reinforced plastics are. So those are that's my nerdy side coming out though.
Those are much like you. I agree. I love the Sig pistols. I have a P226 myself, and I wish. And I also have this weird fascination with odd calibers. I would love to see a Sig P226 in 7.62 by 25 Tokarev. I don't know why. It's a great little round, and I wish there were more modern guns chambered in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different calibers out there because I didn't really address that, but I guess now that I've shot so much 45 now that I'm sort of turned into a wimpy shooter that shoots 38 specials and can handle and tolerate 9mm. But I'll leave the 40s and the 357 SIGs and 44s to the other people. The newer, younger shooters are those people that have much greater mass than I do.
No, I like the bigger calibers, but after a while they get a little tiresome. And man, do those reloading prices go up when you get bigger and bigger in diameter?
Yes, it's like I could fire one round of 500 Smith, or I could used to be able to buy at least several boxes of 22 long rifle. So I'm like, I have to weigh out my pennies here.
Decisions. So that about wraps up our main topic, so we're going to head into the wrap-up section. So don't forget to shop Brownells using our affiliate link, handgunradio.com/Brownells. Be sure to go like Handgun Radio on Facebook and share it with your friends. You sometimes miss out on good posts like Mark's this past week. He offered to help anyone who would be interested in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area on shooting or learning how to shoot. So be sure to go like the Handgun Radio Facebook page and see those sort of posts. Leave us a review on iTunes. It helps the show in the show standings. And be sure to listen to all the great shows on the Firearms Radio Network, including Fat to Fit HQ with Carol. And be sure to visit the Firearms Insider for reviews and SHOT Show 2014 coverage. Also, if you're interested in writing reviews for the Firearms Insider, please email tj@firearmsradio.tv. So, Randy, I really appreciate you coming on the show. It was a really great episode. Are there any links you'd like to share with the listeners?
With Apex Tactical, if people have questions, they can contact us through www.apextactical.com. And if they're interested in new products coming out, please subscribe to either our Facebook page or to our newsletter.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate it, Randy. Thank you for coming on and telling us all about Apex and your history.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So until next week, have fun and safe shooting.